good morning. It is what day is it today? It's Wednesday, a beautiful day to talk about climate change. My name is Zena Bondati, and over the next 1 hour, we're going to talk about the Kusi Ideas Festival, COP27, what happened at COP27, and what next for Kenya going forward. And in studio, I'd like to introduce my guest. Right next to me here is the lovely CS Soipantuya, the CS in the Ministry of Environment. And next to her, we have Ambassador Oletonke, the Danish Ambassador of Kenya. And last but not least, Wanjira Madhai, the Managing Director, Africa and Global Partnerships at the World Resources Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to NTV. Now, let's just start with the basics. What did we expect to get out of COP27? Before I start with I come to the Kenya perspective, let me hear from the global perspective, the Danish Ambassador. What did you expect out of COP27, and is that what we got out of it?
I think for the COP, I mean, the world went into this COP on the back of a year where we've seen floods in Asia, we had droughts, our rivers dried out in Europe, we had a severe drought here in East Africa. So I think there was a lot of expectations, and everybody came into the COP that this COP should actually deliver on adaptation and loss and damage and be like a COP of implementation. Did it deliver? It's a good question. I think it delivered on exactly that. And I think, I mean, going into the COP, at least I didn't expect that it would forge a deal on loss and damage and get that into the text. On the other hand, I think there was quite a lot of disappointment on the issue of CO2 emissions and reduction of use of fossil fuels.
Yes, and the EU did express disappointment on that
yes,
at the
indeed.
end. Yes, yes. So let's hear from Waziri, Kenya's perspective. Are you happy with the outcomes of the COP? Is Kenya happy?
Thank you, Zainab. I can say we can count gains and losses from the COP27. Like Balozi says, this was touted as an implementation COP, action COP, because COP26 was about heavily laden with commitments and promises. But we gained from the perspective of the loss and damage. 30 years down the line, COP27 became the point where we got movement around loss and damage, which is very impressive. It's good. It took long because it's a critical issue of concern, but this is where we start, and we are hopeful that the framework and mechanism around the loss and damage fund will be accessible, transparent, and we will see finances flowing around loss and damage. In the area of climate finance, it's disappointing for me that we have the 13 years where we've been talking about 100 billion per year. The promises are yet to come through. And then in COP27, we were now talking about a new funding mechanism before the completion of one that we've been talking about. So there's a problem there. And for me, I expected that this being an implementation COP and the kind of catastrophes we are finding ourselves in would have moved everybody to action. Yes. For us, where we sit as Kenya, as government, we are doing all that can be done to capitalize on nature-based solutions, because that's what we can do best. But for those people with a past, I think they need to loosen up and know that, you know, if we don't,
one of those people.
If we don't, if we don't act together, like the UN Secretary General said, the options we have are two. It's either to engage in an action pact or a suicide pact, because any action, if it's a good action we take as a country, it benefits the world, benefits the globe.
Yes.
If it's the wrong decisions, like around mitigation, for me that's the sad bit, that we are still haggling about facing down and
versus phasing out.
versus phasing out. I think we need to get serious. Yes.
Okay, Wanjira, that's a good point for you to jump in. Waziri has mentioned the funding mechanisms. COP28 is now where those discussions of the loss and damage funding is expected to begin. Considering we had this $100 billion fund that we've talked about for years and years and COPs, and still very little progress is being made on it, are we hopeful that this loss and damage fund is actually going to be populated and that there'll actually be money in it?
Well, Zainab, first of all, thank you for having me as well. But we have to be hopeful. Let's start there. I think that's why we are in these processes in the first place. And COP is a slow process. This is what they are actually by design, consensus processes and slow. So we celebrate every gain. I think the fact that we got the loss and damage fund decision at COP27, we now have a year. Actually, the transitional committee is going to discuss now, convene and begin to discuss the modalities of the loss and damage. And then we will see in 28 what decisions what recommendations they make. So we ought to see some progress in this year. We have to consider the reality that it's getting much worse. Just as Waziri and Balozi have said, we're actually losing the ability to have much of a choice in terms of what we do first and we're going to have to do everything. So it's going to get more expensive, it's going to get harder. That's what we're up against. And so, yeah, we have to be hopeful that this loss and damage transitional committee makes good progress.
Balozi, we've talked about, there's that global goal to maintain temperature limits at 1.5 degrees. But if you look at what the science says if you take every single country that has submitted its national plan for combating climate change and you put them all together and even you were to implement all of them, it still does not get us to 1.5 degrees. It gets us at best 2-point-something degrees, which is bad for science. According to science, it's bad for science. And at COPs, there have been attempts to try and limit that, but at COP27, there was that feeling that COP27 is where the 1.5 degree dream went to die. And we've had so many conferences, and even starting tomorrow, the nation is hosting another one, the Kusi Ideas Festival, to talk about this climate change issue. How do we get back on track to that 1.5 degree?
I mean, first of all, you're right. All science says that if we put all the promises we have now together, and if the world lives up to those promises, which is a different thing actually, we would most likely end up around 2.5 degrees. That's where we are heading right now. I think everybody is really trying to keep the 1.5 to 2 degree alive, because if we give up on that, then if we say no, it's 2.5, then those who are not that interested in climate change and not using fossil fuels, they will say, no, if we go to 3 or 3.5. So I think we have to maintain that ambition, and I think that is actually really, really important, while at the same time being realistic on where is the world heading, because we know with 2.5 degrees, we will see more droughts, we will see more floods, we will see more, so it's clear heat waves, for instance, and we will have areas on this globe which will become more or less uninhabitable.
Yes.
So that gives us some pointers on where to invest also in the future, because I still believe in terms of adaptation that whereas the whole mitigation issue and getting rid of fossil fuels, that's a global problem that needs global solutions. Whereas mitigation, it hits locally, and it hits like only if you take Kenya, the climate change will affect the different areas of Kenya differently.
Yes.
So they need local solutions. That's why I'm really positive towards the counties taking the lead in the adaptation, because they know what's happening in their area as such. But again, it's really important that we know where we're heading, what we are up against. But again, I still believe that the ambition should still be there. The only chance the world have of getting back to 1.5 is if we somehow one day learn to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. Science is there. It's actually doable nowadays, but it's extremely expensive, and you will need a lot of energy right now.
So it's easier to just leave alone the fossil fuels.
I mean, if someday we invent this huge vacuum cleaner that can suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, true. But I mean, in Denmark, like the biggest emitter of CO2 in Denmark is a cement factory, and they are now have just launched an experiment to suck out the CO2 out of the emissions that they are doing. It is expensive, but they say they are actually optimistic that within the next 5 years they are able to do that. So there are, I mean, the technology is coming. It's just not coming fast enough.
Yes. So on that point, Waziri, in Kenya, there are already parts of the country that are living above 1.5 degrees. Turkana, Narok, parts of Baringo, already living above 1.5 degrees. And this is based on a report that was done, I think, in 2017, 2018 there. With that in mind, parts of the country already living above 1.5 degrees. The global goal is for the whole world to live at least within 1.5 degrees. What are the priority areas for the country in terms of adaptation and mitigation?
I think, first of all, I think it's the fact that the climate actions are heavily informed by science through the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is very critical and important, because all the players know what needs to be done. And the whole discussion between the developed nations and the developing countries, and I can speak as Africa, is that we are disproportionately affected despite being low in terms of contributing to the global warming. And that doesn't absolve us from responsibilities to act. I can say we are doing what we need to do, but everyone needs to play ball, especially in the area of mitigation. And the whole fossil fuel story. If Kenya as a country that, we are still really young in terms of the economic muscle, we are standing at over 92% renewable energy feeding our grid right now. If Kenya can do it, then you can imagine what these other big economies can achieve. And that way we deal with the issue of fossil fuels. So it's actually doable. And when it comes to your question about the fact that certain parts of this country and Africa indeed is warming higher than the other parts of the world, calls for really actions that, the devastating effects of the drought, for example, that we are faced with. We must think about, and I'm happy that the discussion is happening right now, where we don't rely on firefighting droughts. We now have to think about, climate smart agriculture. We have to think about adaptation measures. We have to think about what we are discussing right now in the country, increase our carbon sinks, because that gives us a lasting solution. And I'm speaking about our tree growing initiative of 15 billion trees that we want to plant in the next 10 years. It will give us a lasting solution, because it will address the food insecurity problem. It will address the issue of droughts, of course, which rolls into the whole thing about food insecurity. So for us, we are thinking about those solutions, and within the scope of greening the country and enhancing our carbon sinks through growing of trees, we also want to distract our populations from heavy reliance on biomass. And I'm happy Balozi is here, because the whole question about alternatives to the fuel sources in this country. Our populations right now, particularly in the rural areas, 80%, we are depending on firewood and charcoal. It is not sustainable, especially, and it actually close back on the initiative we are saying, let us green our country, let us fill our country with trees. But as long as our populations are still heavily relying on the same trees for fuel, then it will be a zero-sum game. So we are in partnership with different players, the private sector, our development partners, and some initiatives are actually geared towards coming up with a lasting solution.
And in fact, even at COP27, the Energy CS, Davis Churchill did mention a couple of engagements we're having with Belgium and another country, I can't remember the other one, to bring up hydrogen.
Yes,
And
green
convert
hydrogen.
it into, green hydrogen, and convert it into fuel,
Yes.
and even build converters that will enable the vehicles on the roads,
Yes.
so that instead of throwing away that fossil fuel vehicle, we just convert it into a
Yeah, and I want to
into a
join
hydrogen
my
vehicle.
sister Wanjera in saying there is hope. We know what needs to be done,
Yes.
and we know what to do, and it's actually doable. We just need to up our commitments and action. Yes.
Wanjira, what's the role of every individual in this fight on climate change? Because from a citizen perspective, people will look at it as that's a government problem. The government will figure it out. The government will come up with a solution. But what is my role as a citizen?
Well, before I even go there, I think what the CS has said is really important, that there is the nature-based solutions side of adaptation, but the other piece is what we do with our energy. Yes, we are a largely green energy grid, but we still have so many people who don't have access to energy. There's a cost issue with respect to energy, and how we make that energy accessible, affordable, reliable is part of building resilience. It's part of building that adaptation capacity. I say that because along with the nature-based solutions that will cushion us will be the creation of real affordable jobs that create economic prosperity. That's what will also build resilience, because you cannot adapt to abject poverty. And the reason we are still relying on charcoal and firewood and all of those sources of energy is because of affordability. And so we have to couple all of the efforts that our government is doing and bring in private sector and begin to create productive use of energy that will generate demand for the energy, reduce the cost. The cost of energy has to be part of our adaptation strategy. That's one. Well, all of us have to do everything we can where we are. I think one of the most exciting initiatives is what the CS has mentioned on every one of us planting trees. I love that, because we all have to green the areas where we are. We all have to protect green spaces where we are. I think one of the most important cushions, we saw it during the COVID pandemic, people literally sought refuge in Karura Forest, in Uhuru Park, in places of green.
Yes,
This is
forest,
indicative.
yes.
This is part of the resilience we must build, that we must use those spaces, we must ensure that they are protected and permanently protected, now we know. So I think that's something we can do, is engage, support, and engage in these campaigns that are being launched. I actually cannot wait for Waziri, what you're going to do to celebrate those who actually plant 300 trees each. So that's the sort of thing we must do, is really get involved and engage and begin to protect the spaces around us.
Great, that's a good point to take our very first break. We'll be right back, and when we do come back, we'll be talking about what's next for Kenya as we go forward into COP28, and what we can learn from maybe Denmark, what it is they're doing that Kenya could learn from, and also how the conversations at Kusi Ideas Festival, which begins tomorrow, will go. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we're having a discussion about COP27 and climate change and what's next for COP28. And in the first half of the discussion, we talked about to set the scene with the problem and what needs to be done. So now we talk about solutions. In this next half, we now talk about solutions. And first, I'd like to hear from the ambassador. What is happening? What's the situation like in Denmark, and what can Kenya learn?
I think, first of all, as we have discussed here today, I think really Kenya should be commended for being on the front line of climate change in Africa. It's really a country that is leading, showing the way, showing that in Africa you can also have a very, very green economy and move the right way forward. And of course, we in Denmark, we started our transition back in the 80s and 70s, mainly at that time because fossil fuel became too expensive, and we were 100% fossil fuel dependent at that time. So the government took a strategic decision to say we have to see if we have oil and gas ourselves, and we have to find alternative sources. So that was when the whole adventure on wind technology, wind energy started. And the first 20, 30 years, we built windmills, wind turbines in Denmark that carried a heavy loss. And the consumers, they paid a much higher price for the electricity than they should have if we had had coal-powered plants, for instance. But now what has happened is that the price on renewable energy has come down, so it's actually competitive if you compare with fossil fuels. And the technology is moving so fast so that many of them is actually less expensive than if you do a coal-fired power plant, for instance. And since Denmark, we were one of the first movers, we have world-class technology on especially wind power. We have the biggest producer of wind turbines in the world, Vestas. They're the ones who are in Lake Turkana wind power park. It's Danish turbines. And because we have a grid now heavily dependent on wind power, which is a variable wind source. Sometimes we have more wind to produce, I mean it produces more than 100% of our electricity, and other times we don't have a lot of wind. So we've had to build a very adaptable grid and find solutions to make sure that even though you have a lot of renewable energy into the grid, it's still stable and it's the least cost that you put into the grid. So this is one of the areas where we collaborate with Kenya. We want to share this technology. We don't have a patent on that as Denmark, so we're working very closely with the Ministry of Energy here in the Energy Planning Department to basically see how does that fit in Kenya's grid, because Kenya has again all the abundance of renewable energy you can think of, and again
you have geothermal.
Yeah, geothermal, solar, etc. And it's just a mindset of, oh, we have natural resources because we have coal or oil and gas, instead of thinking, oh, we have natural resources because we have wind and sun and geothermal. That's the change in mindset that is needed. So that's an example. Yeah.
Are you impacted by climate change?
Yes, we are indeed, but Denmark, we are in a place on the globe where we are fairly up north with a temperate climate, which means that we will most likely change into a climate which is more similar to southern France within the next 50 to 60 years, which people think not bad at all. Who doesn't want to be in southern France? But on the other hand, it will have a huge impact on the nature of Denmark. I mean the species of animals, etc. We will have, etc. So, and again, it's still unpredictable. So yeah. But that's the predictions for Denmark.
Waziri, Balozi has talked about technology and how willing Denmark is to share this technology. And technology transfer is always one of the sticky points at any COP. The unwillingness of the West to share technologies, yet we have somebody from the West here saying they're willing to share that technology. How do we get all the other countries in the West to also be as willing as he says Denmark is to share those technologies?
Thank you, Zainab. I'm happy that one of the outcomes of the COP, there was an announcement made by the UN Secretary General around the early warning technologies and some funding really coming through for that. We are very open and welcome to partnerships. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Balozi is here. They have done something that works. And as government, we are really open to partnerships. We are open to explore and up our technological advancement in different areas, and particularly in the area of energy. You are asking what is it? I mean, what is the next step that we are doing? Technology is at the core of it, and we need a lot of support, a lot of partnerships around that. We've already spoken about our efforts around energy. We are at 92.3%. We actually want to push it to 100% by 2030, going renewable, 100% renewable. And allow me to say that as a country, we have options of exploring fossil fuels.
Yes.
But we are holding back on that.
Yes, the
because
president said we will not
because
touch
of
it.
our responsibility. And we hope other people will really think critically around exploring these alternatives and avoiding this troublemaking. Quick, of course, fossil fuels is quick. It helps in advancement, you know, industrialization and everything. But then what is the cost? What is the cost of going that route, or the cost of inaction around climate action? I would also want to say that in terms of the actions that we are also taking, Kenya was, you know, was first in being very bold around the issue of plastics, attempts to phase out, and you know, we started off with a single-use plastic.
Yes.
For me, it's a drop in the ocean, but you can see the boldness that Kenya took and the challenge now we are faced with. And as we are holding the chairmanship of the Committee of African Heads of States and Government, is to convince our neighbors to walk the journey with us. And I'm happy that at the global level, there is an attempt now to take a collective action towards phasing out of plastics.
And there was actually a decision at UNEA 5.
Yes.
And it was called the Nairobi Declaration on Plastics.
Yes,
and
at UNEA actually.
It's being said that it's one of the biggest green deals ever made after the Paris
And Kenya
Agreement.
is on the lead.
Yes.
We are at the forefront. So in terms of even technological support, I think our partners can see the efforts that the country is putting in, and we welcome support because we are willing, we are ready to advance in that direction. Because you know, we've done the banning of single-use plastics. There's a whole lot of other things that need to be done, particularly around sustainable waste management. We have a new law, the Sustainable Waste Management Act. We need to actualize that, and for the
one that
countries,
will require people to sort out their waste.
yes, we need to start sorting our waste at source. And the county governments, I intend to really engage the county governments. Waste management is devolved. But again, the nature of climate and environmental protection actions is that we have a very intricate link between those actions that are county government and those that are national government. And I think the intention and will should be for us to really work together with the county governments, and the discussions are there. The political will is there from both fronts. So I think that's where we need to wade into sustainable waste management. Allow me to speak also to the Greening Kenya program. We are telling Kenyans growing a tree is a life-giving action. And we are launching a campaign on the 21st. It's the president's birthday. And you know, he's been rallying Kenyans to turn birthdays into tree growing ceremonies. We really are serious about that.
So we're going to plant trees to commemorate his birthday.
Yes, and we want to tell Kenyans, if you're turning 40, plant 40 trees on that day, and rally your friends to help you with the 40 trees. When you turn 41, do 41 trees. And within no time, the 15 billion looks so monumental, but we want Kenyans to know that this is a life-giving action. And my sister Wanjera, we want to go to a point where we introduce a certificate of green conduct. Certificate of green conduct.
Yes.
Where Kenyans, because when you break down the 15 billion trees that we are supposed to grow, when we divide it amongst ourselves as a country, it's only 300 trees per Kenyan. So we want to, again, partner with various private sector to come up with technology. Once Zainab, you finish your 300 trees, we give you a certificate of green conduct.
Will you also be giving Kenyans education on which kind of trees, like, so that if I know I'm planting a tree in my village back home in Butere, I know exactly what kind of tree to plant there? Yes,
we will soon be rolling out and launching a strategy, fully fledged strategy, an implementation plan. It comes, and even now we are doing it. KEFRI, the Kenya Forestry Research Institute, is doing tremendous work around species matching. And we have an app that is operational, the KEFRI app, where if you go to this app, you put in your location and you get a list of the tree species that can work within your locality. So that we don't do blind tree planting. In fact, we are saying we are moving from tree planting to tree growing. So that you're planting and nurturing the tree to actually maturity. And we want to link that to the nascent carbon market initiatives that are all over the globe. It's a big discussion so that Kenyans can link tree growing to income generation and livelihood improvement. So there's the carbon markets that are going to come into play in our tree growing initiative, but also we are creating a green army.
Carbon markets is also a very hotly contested subject, especially among civil society groups
Yes.
who do not, they believe that the whole issue of carbon markets is intended to distract Africans from the whole agenda of phasing out fossil fuels.
No, it's a discussion that needs to be interrogated. I mean, people have different viewpoints, but the carbon trading is turning around livelihoods. We have the Mikoko Pamoja project in Kwale.
Yes.
I was there 2 weeks ago. It's turning around people's livelihoods, and it's around the mangrove ecosystems. So we want Kenyans to know that there is a benefit which translates to improved livelihoods in tree growing. And the carbon market space is one of those. But also I was saying that we are working on creating a green army in this country of young people who will help us transition from tree planting to tree growing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Wanjira, this whole thing of transitioning from tree planting to tree growing, there are some families that just have tree planting in them.
Yes.
They plant trees all the time. In my village is very green. Actually, Kakamega County is just largely very green. And trees are very cheap in the market, local market, 10 shillings per seedling. So we're obsessed with planting trees. And my parents, they know how I feel about tree cutting. So every time they need to cut a tree, my dad will call me and tell me, yeah, so I've planted 200 trees. You know, he'll start by telling me how many trees he's planted before he comes around to the issue of the tree he needs to cut down, and he explains why. So how to get people into that culture where you feel pain when a tree has to be cut down, or you feel some type of way about not being in a green space. How do we get Kenyans to that point?
Well, I think a lot of, you've just heard what Waziri has said, a lot of people will start doing that. It starts with the leadership, right? Listening to you talk about trees, a lot of people will start saying, okay, where are we going to plant our trees? So education is really important. How children are introduced to tree planting, to tree growing, and how they begin to love trees and begin to watch them grow as children. So it's in our education system. We have to infuse every element of our lives for it to become a culture. Culture has to be practiced, it has to be infused, and very quickly it becomes like that. The reason you say that, and we know so many people whose lives are surrounded, birthdays were always about trees, mine was like that as well. But then you start to feel the pain, but it takes that time to invest and to build. I love the idea of a certificate of green conduct and the fact that we can have something to show for the 300 trees we planted, and children will begin to have this and show. I think we just have to make it a culture and a practice. It starts with our National Tree Planting Day, that we have a day where we all celebrate as Kenyans, a week even. This is urgent. It is part of how we are going to survive the climate crisis. If we do not have the cushioning of our green vegetation, we are lucky to live in a city like Nairobi that is green, but it's not always going to be like that if we don't fight for it, if we don't invest in it. And our policies are starting to show we are protecting it more and more. It is all about all hands on deck, right? So we have to make it our practice. We have to make it part of what we all do.
And is that tree planting, is that one of the actions that you're highlighting in your State of Climate Action Report?
Absolutely. I mean, the State of Climate Action Report was really important. It's 2022, and it looked at 40 indicators of climate action. With respect to the Paris Agreement, how are we doing? Are we on track to meeting our obligations and keeping temperatures at 1.5? And the hard reality is that we are not. We actually, on none of them, are we on track? That's really serious. And what that implies is that we no longer have the luxury of picking and choosing the lowest cost interventions. We can't say we're going to do this and then this and then this. We now have to do everything. And we have to do everything faster. Phasing out of
Yeah.
coal,
Yeah.
6 times faster. Restoring landscapes, 3 times faster than we're doing. So everything has to be accelerated for us to make the ambitions. But there were some bright spots in the state of climate action, and that was on renewable energy and on electric vehicles. So it's no surprise that that's also some of the bright spots we are seeing. Other than that, everything else is accelerated action.
Yes, yes. So, Balozi, tomorrow we start the Kusi Ideas Festival. The focus is on climate change and climate action to get people to talk about what needs to be done. What are your expectations? What do you expect to hear from those conversations?
I hope to hear a lot of ideas and a lot of solutions on the way forward for Kenya, because as we've just heard, of course, the whole electricity discussion is one thing, but we have to think much more holistic around climate change, and we have to think about it as a green transition, and not only on energy, but on everything we do and how we live. Like the CS mentioned, the waste management bill, the rate of and how waste are produced here in Kenya is unsustainable in the long run, and that needs to be tackled. And I really want to congratulate the government on the new act on waste management, but also on extended producer responsibility, because the producers of the waste also needs to be in on it. Otherwise, we will not solve the problem. So it's a perfect example of finding solutions, way forwards on the challenges that is facing Kenya. And Kenyans are extremely entrepreneurial and have a lot of ideas. When you go out, even to areas like Mathara, you'll see people who start to grow in different levels and
actually,
vertical
has
growing.
Won the Earthshot Prize.
Exactly, and it's amazing. And you have people who use recycled plastics for pavements.
Yes.
We have that at the embassy. It's amazing. It's cheaper and they're lighter and it's good for the environment. So what's not to like? I mean, it should be all what the Kenyans bought. Talking about when Jerry, you mentioned electric vehicles. We have at the embassy, because we also trying to walk the talk in terms of doing
Green
things
living.
green.
Yes.
So we are transforming our embassy. We have engaged Tata Solutions, which is a waste management collection. So we sort our waste, we think about what we eat, and we also bought an electric vehicle. The interesting thing was that we couldn't, at that time, it's a bit more than a year ago, we couldn't find an electric vehicle here in Nairobi. We had to go to Uganda to find one, and it was a Nissan Leaf. And in the beginning, people were quite skeptical. You can't have an electric vehicle here in Nairobi. It will not work. It works perfectly, and you never drive more.
And we took a ride on it. NTV took a ride on the vehicle.
Yeah. No, and it's a perfect vehicle, and it can ride 300 to 400 kilometers in one charge.
Wow.
And when you're in Nairobi, you only ride 30, 50 kilometers at the maximum.
Yes.
And then when you come back, you plug it in the electricity, and the next morning it's fully charged.
Just the socket in your house.
Yeah, and for Kenya, I mean, seeing fuel prices going on in the petrol stations, you have the abundance of electricity, which is on top of that green electricity.
Right.
Why is that not moving? Why is
As we say in Kiswahili, shida iko wapi?
Shida iko wapi? Shida iko wapi?
Yeah, actually, we need to take tab of the number of electric cars we have in this city, in this country. And we need to up the numbers, really.
But we are doing well. I think we have to again congratulate the government, because there is an effort, and especially 2- and 3-wheelers, to electrify those. And there's a huge effort. The ministry or the Department of Environment, Industrialization, and the Treasury and Transport to initiate this and transform. So I think we're getting there, and we have.
We are getting there, Zainab, and I must say that, of course, from the cabinet level, the climate action, like even from the global level, it's not a one-man show. It's a collective effort. We you know, one action reverberates across every other corner of this globe. And again, the efforts are very interministerial. We are soon putting together the Climate Change Council. It had been delayed for some time, and that will keep us rolling, where we consolidate all these efforts. Because the Ministry of Environment and Forestry might be the mother ministry for climate action, but heavily dependent on the transport. You know, look at the ideas that are on the table about the transport sector. If we plug in the electric vehicles into our green energy, you know, we get sorted to another, you know, we keep increasing our ambitions, which contribute to our nationally determined contributions, which from where I sit, I hope that inspires everybody else to translate to a flow of climate finance. Yeah, yes. Because these things are joint in the hip. You know, if we say we are going renewable in energy, but everyone else is emitting business as usual, then it becomes a zero-sum game. Yeah, every action has a ripple effect on everything else. Yes. So with the setting up of the Climate Change Council, we are going to roll out a number of activities, including actualizing our sustainable waste management plan, and we will start engaging our manufacturers, our producers, to take responsibility. You know, it's as a bare minimum. When you produce your plastics, have it in mind from when you're generating it to where it's going to end up. And we have seen the tremendous opportunity that is within sustainable waste management for income generation. The other day we were in a Kitengela plant where the county government of Kajiado, supported by UNDP and other partners, and also the ministry is part of the process, livelihoods are turning around through sustainable waste management. Those young people who live around Dandora, the opportunities are immense to turn things around for them. But we need to delve into it. We need to hold our hands together and make this happen. And hope. There's hope. Absolutely. Because we are determined. Actually, for me, greening the country is top on the agenda. Sustainable waste management, which comes with pollution control, and providing alternative solutions for our rural folks, particularly the women in the domestic sphere of, you know, so that they don't have to heavily rely on this cheap and easily accessible biomass of firewood and charcoal.
Exactly. I mean, Zainab, it goes without saying almost that the commitment of our governments, especially across the continent, is huge. There's no shortage of amazing ideas. And one thing that we haven't actually talked about that came out of COP that is so significant to all of this is how we pay for it, how we build the sort of finance flows that are needed. And there was a huge discussion, and we saw the Prime Minister of Barbados push the Bridgetown Initiative. Essentially, the multilateral development banks have to do better. They have to make sure that finance is flowing to charge some of these ideas that are coming out, to make sure that there is finance not in forms of loans, but in forms of grants, so that people can hasten. They have to be part of the adaptation agenda. They have to do more development than bank. And that's going to be important, because right now when people have so many ideas and governments are already spending upwards of 10% of GDP on adaptation, it behooves those international finance organizations, corporations, to do better. And I think that goes without saying that it was a breakthrough at COP27 to see that.
Yes, when the multilateral banks were told, shape up.
As they should, right? Because you see all the ideas and where we need to invest in them.
So in 30 seconds, Wanjira, while you're still speaking, what do you expect out of COP28?
Well, out of COP28, I hope we'll have a lot more clarity on how loss and damage finance will flow, because that was left open. We'll hopefully see that. We will have to see a doubling of adaptation finance. That was expected on the agenda of 27. We didn't see it. We didn't even make the agenda. We hope that will happen. From 2019 levels, 20 billion, it needs to go up to 40 billion. Adaptation is the most important opportunity for us. And then, of course, on nature-based solutions, my favorite one, that we see the activation of this, at least for Africa, the AFR 100 initiatives, more initiatives like from ministers like ours, doubling and pushing on the implementation of commitments that have been made.
Okay. Ambassador, what do you expect to see from COP27? COP28, sorry.
Again, clarity on the loss and damage fund, because one thing is to agree, and I think that's the easy part, that we need a fund. The difficult part will be how to finance it, and I think they need to come up with some innovative mechanism, but that's going to be really interesting to see the recommendations out of that. Then I really hope that the ambitions of phasing out fossil fuel is opted at COP28. That was really what was missing at this COP. And then I think another point, and you touched a bit upon it, is the private sector and the global investors. They are increasingly active at COPs, and oftentimes I feel, listening to them, that many of these private companies, they are more ambitious than many of the governments who are there and are ahead of them, which I think is extremely positive and really a trend that I hope will continue in the following COPs.
Waziri, finally, what would be Kenya's expectations at COP28? Yeah,
our expectations would be that, of course, what my colleagues here have said, loss and damage, we need that actualized. I want to also say that we shall be having a climate summit next year, hopefully early next year. It was announced by His Excellency the President during COP27, and this is to provide leadership for the African region to come up with a strong common position around mitigation, really. Let us just face out, this out and down story. Let us just face it out. It is doable. Yeah, it sounds very small, and but I think that is where we should go. So for me, we will be looking forward in the climate summit to concretize our position as the African region, and to come up with strong recommendations, hoping to influence the region in terms of waste management around plastics, so that we have more determined commitments and actions. Something also that gained some good movement in the COP27 was around a gender action plan. At least now there is a discussion about a fund for actualizing the gender action plan around climate change. I hope that can be concretized, because the role of the gender discourse in climate change is very, very critical and central, and we need to actualize that and have some actionables around it.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Waziri Soipan Tuya, Ambassador Oletonke, and Wanjira Maathai, thank you very much for making time to join this discussion. And I do hope that you're joining us at the Kusi Festival. I know your speakers. Yes. I hope that you'll have such an engaging discussion, and we hope to engage with you again. And the Kusi Ideas Festival begins tomorrow, ends on Friday, to be hosted at the Karura Forest. We will be planting some trees.
Yeah, great.
Yes, social media will be making. I don't know if you're planting 300 trees per person.
We might start issuing certificates of
green
conduct tomorrow.
So I hope we're planting 300 trees per person, and the president himself will be joining us at that tree planting. And do join those discussions. They'll be live on NTV Kenya, live on NTV Uganda, and also live on digital platforms across East Africa, all our digital platforms across East Africa. And engage with us. What would you like to hear from that Kusi Ideas Festival? We're bringing experts from across the world, not just Africa, to talk about the climate problem in Africa and the solutions and what's next, and how you as a person who lives in Africa can contribute in the climate action. My name is Zena Bondati, and see you tomorrow at Kusi Ideas Festival.